What worries me if those experts are all fired for reasons that don't make any sense, that kind of exchange ends. So that's very worse. And the other thing, of course, is that about a year ago or so, there were rumors, and I forget the individual's name. He's some minor figure in the Trump administration, even
Mhm.
threatened to kick Canada out of the Five Eyes.
Something is changing in our country, and most people feel it before they can explain it.
Welcome to the Steady State Sentinel. I'm Lauren Anderson. I served nearly 3 decades in the FBI, focused on national security in both operational and executive leadership roles at home and overseas. I now work in geopolitics and governance with a focus on institutional integrity. So, as we get into tonight's episode, if you haven't had the opportunity to listen to our recent episode on why an apolitical FBI is vital to national security, I'd encourage you to do so. It provides important context for tonight's conversation. And my guest is Phil Gurski, and I am delighted Phil is here. He is our first international guest.
Mhm.
Phil is a former senior strategic analyst with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. He is the president of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting and host of the podcast Spies Like Us, where I was honored to be a guest late last year to talk about the FBI. Phil is the author of multiple books on terrorism and intelligence, including a forthcoming book marking the 25th anniversary of 9/11. Phil and his colleagues hosted me in Ottawa last fall at the Pillar Society, and we've had quite a few candid conversations since then. We both know that alliances between the US and other countries aren't abstract. They're built over years and they can be strengthened or weakened by who's in the room and who's no longer in the room. So today we're going to ask a hard question during this conversation. When America's closest allies look at the United States right now, at our institutions, our intelligence and law enforcement communities, and our leadership, what do they see and what are they assessing? So, Phil, I'm delighted that you are with us today. And before we get into our present discussion, I always love to start and say to everybody, what drew you into your work in the first place? Why did you want to do this?
Well, first and foremost, Lauren, thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. You were a wonderful guest here in Ottawa last October. We got nothing but rave reviews for your candor in talking about what's happening in your country right now in the
Thank you.
security, intelligence, and law enforcement community. We've become friends. We've stayed in touch, which is great. You know, life takes amazing turns sometimes. So I began my career actually not with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, but with Communications Security Establishment, or CSE, which is the Canadian Signals Intelligence Organization, the equivalent of NSA in your country. And a long time ago, decades and decades ago, I was at university in my hometown of London, Ontario. It was during the early 1980s recession, which I'm sure you remember was not a great time in the West. Interest rates were through the roof. I think my brother once signed a mortgage for 22% on his house.
Oh,
I was an arts graduate
sure.
from Western University, and jobs were not plentiful at the time. And as somebody graduated with a master's in Spanish, it didn't look good. And I was despairing for what to do. I had a part-time job at the local YMCA, which kind of
Mm,
put me through university. But I decided that staring at wrinkled old men naked in the shower for the next 25 years was not going to be an excellent career choice. And so I decided to look for other work. And lo and behold, in the student placement office up on campus, there was
mhm.
a very plain, no logo, sort of piece of cardboard that says Department of National Defense wants you. It's almost kind of like Uncle Sam wants you, right? But without the
Mhm.
fancy graphics. And one of the categories they were hiring for was linguist. Well, I was a linguist. I had studied 5 languages at Western. I'd taken linguistics courses, so I thought, wow. And the summer before, I worked as a student translator in Ottawa from Spanish to English. So I thought this is a great opportunity, and so I won't bore you with the details, but I applied, and after, of course, a long process of being vetted, security clearance, et cetera, I showed up in Ottawa at what I thought was national defense, and I get this indoctrination briefing by this big bear of a man who was a former RCMP officer, scared the living daylights out of me. And he basically said, "We're not D&D, son. We're signals intelligence." To which my response was, "Excuse me? Um, First of all, what is signals intelligence?" Because
Hmm.
of course this is pre-internet days, Lauren. CSE did not exist on paper. Well, sorry, did not exist in the public mind in 1983. And so I entered the world of intelligence purely through dumb luck. And I spent 17 and a half years with CSE as a multilingual foreign intelligence analyst, working in about 10 different languages. And then got an opportunity to move to the security service. Again, serendipitously, as an Iranian specialist back in 2001. And then 9 months later, 9/11 happened. And because I also had Arabic and I had a good background in Middle Eastern history and culture, I quickly morphed into a jihadi specialist, which is what I spent my career doing at the security service. So, you can't plan these things sometimes.
Yeah.
I think it's a little easier now in both of our countries in the sense that our agencies are a little more out there in terms of their
Hmm.
recruiting campaigns. There's websites, there's places to go. But way back then, and I'm not sure you had a similar experience when you joined the bureau, but they weren't obvious. It wasn't quite as secretive as the old British method of tapping you on the shoulder at Cambridge or Oxford and saying, "We might have a job for you." But I ended up at
No.
Ottawa and spent 32 and a half years with a career that, in all honesty, and I say this to this day, I had the luckiest job on the planet. I had a job that I couldn't wait to get to every morning because it was so exciting and it was so important.
It truly is, and you're right about how agencies were at that time. I mean, NSA in the United States was always known as no such
No such
agency
agency.
for a long period of time because for a long period of time you had to operate that way. And
That's right.
I think we could probably both argue the merits of having that kind of discretion as
Mm.
it was then, and now sometimes you can't even stay on top of things because there's so much information out there. And I think it's tough to manage because I think we'd both argue too that there are certain kinds of information and intelligence that need to stay hidden, need to stay quiet.
I think, I hold to the maxim that you don't discuss sources, you don't discuss methods. Those are
Hmm.
sacrosanct. So I even worked as a crypto analyst for a year, and I will never talk about what systems we were working on and what systems we successfully were able to read, because that betrays a very, very sensitive series of operations. Similar with your career with the bureau, you never
Right.
disclose your sources, right?
Yep.
Unless they end up testifying for the prosecution in a criminal trial, that's a different matter. But if it's not sources and it's not methods, I think there's a lot of benefit to talking about our careers and what our agencies did. First of
Hmm.
all, it can help attract really good Canadians and Americans that want to do similar jobs. And secondly, you talked about the information flow. There's so much crap out there,
Yeah.
disinformation about what we do and why we do it, that formers such as ourselves, if we convey stories about what we did, it can help dispel a lot of the disinformation and misinformation. I'm not saying it's going to solve
Y-
it because that's a huge problem, but I do think that our citizenry has a right to know some of it. I mean, we are civil servants. We are paid from the public
Yeah.
purse. We're doing the best job we can to help keep our nations and our allies safe. And so I think coming playing with some information, again, not compromising sources or methods, is in the end of the day, I think is a positive outcome and as a positive change we've seen over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And it is a careful balance. And that's
Yeah.
actually a perfect segue because a lot of people think that out in the Canadian public, the American public, that we operate within our agencies. And I think they don't really appreciate and haven't had the opportunity to learn about the importance of those liaison relationships. And you spent decades inside CSIS, deeply integrated into what we know as the Five Eyes partnership, and particularly with the US.
Mhm.
So, for our listeners who may not be familiar with that concept or the absolute criticality of our relationships, can you briefly explain what Five Eyes is and why it matters?
Sure. You know, coming out of the Second World War, not surprisingly, there was a very strong Western alliance that fought the Axis powers, so Japan, Italy, and Germany, and we were victorious by, May of 45 against Germany and August of 45 against Japan.
Hmm.
And of course, those alliances were very strong. I mean, you look at D-Day, for example. It's not a coincidence that the three armies that landed on the beaches in Normandy were Canadian, American, and British.
Hmm.
The plans had gone through, years of preparation in England, and you've probably seen all the movies I've seen too about the landing at the beaches, and the number of soldiers that we lost. But in the end of the day, that was the turning point of World War II. And those alliances were strengthened that day. And so as a consequence, the alliances went forward. And also, it should be also mentioned too, Lauren, that even during the war, before the creation of the Five Eyes itself, Britain, Canada, and the United States shared some very sensitive intelligence
Hmm.
on our adversaries, primarily the Germans and the Japanese. In fact, there was a sort of incipient signals intelligence unit in Canada called the Examinations Unit that was working on German and Japanese cipher. And of course, everyone knows about Bletchley Park, of course, the famous
Right.
enigma breaking by the Polish mathematicians working with Alan Turing. But both our countries, too, had a major role to play in that. So after the war, so the immediate, I think, logical alliance was between your country and the United Kingdom. So there was an
Hmm.
agreement that came out shortly after the war. We joined that alliance, I believe, if memory serves me correct, in the early 50s, I think 1952, officially. And then eventually two other countries, Australia and New Zealand, were brought in, and it's now called the Five Eyes. It's a logical pairing. First of all,
Hmm.
we're all English speaking, although in Canada, of course, bilingual with English and French,
Right.
but we have similar culture, we have a similar history, we have a similar worldview. We fought on the same side in two world wars, and there's a sense of community, I think, amongst those partners that is very strong, and that led to, I think, a level of trust that we could share very sensitive intelligence amongst those five partners. And for your listeners, we do share very sensitive intelligence, both signals intelligence, human imagery, you name it,
Hmm.
amongst the five partners. Now, there will always be intelligence that's too sensitive to share. You guys call it no foreign, we call it Canadian eyes only. There's other terms, I'm sure, in the other three partners. But in my time in SIGINT and Human, I never, I was always very impressed with the
Hmm.
sheer volume of information that was shared, and that sharing enabled us to work on investigations, to produce intelligence that, in the
Hmm.
end of the day, protected our interests, and in some cases, protected public safety. I call it the gold standard of sharing, Lauren, and
Yeah.
from your time in the bureau and my time
Yeah.
with CSIS, there are other partners besides the Five Eyes. We work a lot with Western European partners,
Hmm.
even partners in Africa and Asia as well, depending on the circumstances. But those relationships will never be as close, I don't think, as the Five Eyes partnership has. And again, it speaks to a shared vision of what we want the world to be. We want the world to be free. We want it to be democratic. We want it to be liberal in outlook. And these intelligence agencies, they work very hard to provide decision makers and policymakers with the information required to help protect that kind of world. And it's worked very well.
It has.
Until
It has.
until recently, maybe. But
Until
it,
recently. Yeah, no, no, no. I agree with you. In fact, I would argue that all of our countries and the world writ large is much safer
yes,
because of these relationships that we've had for so many decades now. And I think that's something that until you're inside, you don't appreciate. And that's something that I kind of love to stand outside and holler out to the
yeah.
world is we are so much better when we're together.
And it's funny, Lauren. We're maybe it's not so big in your country, but it's obviously an issue here. I know it's an issue in academia in the United States. This
Hmm.
whole anti-colonialism and talking about colonial powers and people trying to cling to the past kind of thing and laying all the ills of the world on colonialism. Yeah, a lot of bad things happen under colonialism, but we're not
Right.
the source of all evil in the world. And the Five Eyes is not an effort to, uh, you know, um, recreate colonial powers in parts of the
Hmm.
world. It's an effort to share information that can keep us collectively safer. And I brook no tolerance for people who say, well, you shouldn't be sharing with these countries because of what they've done historically. I'm saying I'm sharing with them because of what they're doing now. And the
Right.
fact that we rely on you, you rely on us, we rely on the Brits, et cetera, et cetera. This is a really good development. This is a good club to be in. Being on the outside would I think make us collectively weaker. And so I would hope that the leadership within the Five Eyes,
Hmm.
at least put it this way, I know that within the intelligence and law enforcement community, the relations are still very, very strong. My
Yes.
concern is at the political level, and I'm sure we're
I
gonna get into that. But I
we are,
think
we
that
are going to.
operationally, it's pretty strong.
Yeah, I agree, and we are going to get into that. And I just have one more bit of a kind of a layup question
Sure.
for everybody to understand, and that is, we do have these great relationships. But one place where Canada is different is Canada does not have an external intelligence service
That's right.
modeled on MI6 and certainly the CIA. So I wonder, when you look at that, as we move into talking about the relationship, how has that framed, if it has, your relationship with the United States in the intelligence world?
It's a great question. So to bring your listeners a bit of sort of background as to why we don't. So the security service, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, or CSIS, CSIS, was created in 1984. It used to be part of the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. It was called the Security Service,
Hmm.
kind of like MI5 within the law enforcement organization. For reasons I won't get into because it's very complicated, it was decided to carve that function out of the RCMP and make it a civilian agency as opposed to a law enforcement organization.
Hmm.
And so CISA saw the light of day in June of 1984. I started at CSE in July of 83. So I was there at the birth of CSIS and worked very closely with them right from day one. The powers that be at the time decided that they wanted to basically replicate the security service and give it a foreign intelligence mandate, but very limited in scope. So it's actually a misconception. CSIS is also a foreign intelligence organization,
Hmm. Great point.
but the minions at the time, when they drafted legislation, put this really bizarre clause in the CSIS Act. It's called Section 16.
Hmm.
CSIS has the authority to collect foreign intelligence, but wait for it, only within Canada, which kind of sounds like an oxymoron if you think about it. How can it be foreign
Yeah.
if you're collecting it within Canada? Well, there are
Yeah.
ways, and I won't get into the details, but it's important to realize that from a security intelligence perspective, CSIS has no barriers. It can go anywhere in the universe to collect security intelligence. We're not constrained to Canada. It's only
Hmm.
with respect to foreign intelligence that we can't collect outside of Canada. And of course, the Signals Intelligence Organization is by definition a foreign intelligence organization, albeit signals not human. And
Right.
so, it does collect foreign intelligence. I don't think it complicated matters. I mean, my dealings with the CIA only stem from my time at CSIS. So I was very familiar with
Hmm.
NSA for 17 and a
Hmm.
half years. And then when I joined the security service, of course, that was 9/11. And, again, the sharing of information was the floodgates had opened. We were all
Hmm.
sharing in real time because we had to. You can't
Right.
let 3,000 people die and your closest friend and neighbor and not help them figure out who's who in the zoo and to try to go after these people, right? So I don't think that the lack of a dedicated foreign human service
Hmm.
has jeopardized our relationship with the Five Eyes. And you're right, we are the only one. Even the Kiwis have one. Their service is a hybrid.
Hmm.
There's ASIO and there's ASIS in Australia. There's MI5, MI6, and of course there's the Bureau and the agency. There's still a debate now, Lauren, on whether we should create one.
Hmm.
But you don't create these things overnight. Um, you see academics and policy wonks talking about this periodically. I think you should just remove the within Canada clause from CSIS and make it a hybrid service. We're
Right.
already good at recruiting human sources. That's what we do for a living. So you've got half the organization works foreign intelligence and half works security intelligence. It's not
Yeah.
complicated.
It makes sense. And another part of the relationship, I think people may not recognize, and as we start talking about what's going on today, is that also overseas, the FBI has positions called legal attaches,
Yeah,
including in Canada and in over 50 countries around the world. And similarly, your folks are deployed as well.
that's
So
right.
we're not only working together in the United States and Canada, but
That's right.
those relationships become important because it's another trusted partner in third
Exactly.
countries around the world. And I think that's also been a very successful partnership.
I recall one story when I arrived at CSIS in 2001. This is prior to 9/11. I attended a
Hmm.
presentation by a dear friend of mine who worked for the RCMP and then for the security service and then for CSIS. He was in Nairobi in '98
Hmm.
when the attack took place. That was the Al Qaeda attack against your embassies in Dar es Salaam and in Nairobi.
Hmm.
And he was actually in meeting with his CIA counterpart at the time when the bombs went off. And he tells this story how they were blown across the room from the shockwave. And then basically his job was to do anything possible to help your embassy and the staff and other Americans in Kenya, get to the bottom of what happened, provide any assistance possible, medical, whatever it took to try to get over this. So yeah, those trusted relationships, as you said, work right across the world. And they work because of the Five Eyes Alliance. And they work
Hmm.
because we know each other. We don't always agree on things. There was a lot of
Right.
um, disagreement. Canada did not go into Iraq in 2003
Hmm.
under President Bush. We were the one that did not agree to go in. The Brits went in, the Australians went in. But I mean, overall, we share the same goals. We share basically the same training. I mean, we cross train all the time, right? In each other's organizations,
Mm-hmm.
we have
Yep.
secondees, in each other's organizations. We even have people who get married in other organizations. I know of at least two examples of Americans and Canadians in SIGINT that ended up marrying each other.
There you
Um,
go. And we share
so
values. We
absolutely,
share values
Western
as
values. Yeah,
humans, and we share values as democracies.
that's
And I
correct.
think that's really important. And to pivot a little bit about today, and you and I have talked about this on multiple occasions over the year plus we've known each other, is when you look at what's happening right now in the United States broadly, and then, of course, with the agencies that you've had most of the work with over your career, what do you see? What does this mean for you? What do you think it means for the relationship between the United States and Canada in the intelligence and law enforcement sector?
Okay, it's a great question. So, as I said earlier, I've been assured by my contacts who are still within the security intelligence community that at the operational level, it's the status quo ante. Everything is working fine,
Hmm.
right? Because we know each other. We share briefs. We've had cases. About a year and a half ago, there was a Pakistani student on a visa here in Canada who tried to cross the border into New York State. He wanted to go to
Hmm.
New York and carry out an attack against Jewish targets in retribution for what Israel was doing in Gaza Strip. And the FBI and CSIS and the RCMP shared intelligence information all the time, and the guy was arrested at the border. So he never got anywhere near New York City. That shows that at the operational level, things are working well.
Right.
The problem is, and it's not just in your country, what worries me is what we call the politicization of intelligence.
Hmm.
You know, as well as I do, that we're messengers, we're advisory bodies. We collect information, we process it, we assess it for veracity, we assess it for reliability, we analyze it, we bring in other types of information, we put it through the blender, we figure out what does all this stuff mean, and then we send it up the line to senior people so that they can be in the know as to what's happening on X, Y, or Z. Right?
Hmm.
We can't tell them what to do with it. We can't tell
Right.
them to use it, not use it, line your bird cage with it. That's not our job. We're the messengers. We're not the
Hmm.
implementers of the intelligence. What I have noticed, and again, it's not just in your country, is that there are times where people in very high positions don't like the message and then attempt to shoot the messenger. So I'll give you a
Yeah.
couple examples, one from my country and one from yours, what you'd be very familiar with. But we had an inquiry a couple of years ago into Chinese interference in our federal elections.
Right.
And my former organization, CSIS, has been warning for 40 years about this, 40 years about this. And somebody, we don't know who, leaked a very sensitive intelligence summary to the Globe and Mail, which is a main newspaper in Toronto,
Hmm.
saying CSIS thinks this is happening. And it caused a big scandal. Why was this leaked? What are they saying? And the first thing that came out from the Prime Minister's office was, we don't want our security intelligence service to be spreading anti-Asian racism in Canada. And we thought, this has nothing to do with anti-Asian racism. We're
Wow.
talking about a foreign power seeking to influence our elections in much the same way the Russians sought to influence elections in your country in
Yep.
2016 and 2020.
Hmm.
Then we had a big inquiry into this, and it turned out that several intelligence reports that had been sent up the line were sent back for rewording because the message was uncomfortable, because they didn't want to hear what China was up to. And yet we've been saying this again since the 80s that they've been up to this. Similar in your country, you've got agencies like the National Security Agency, the DIA, talking about, for example, bomb assessments after the bombing of Iranian nuclear sites last year,
Yep.
where
Yep.
the White House said complete obliteration. They said, excuse me, sir, we looked at the imagery and we've got intelligence on the ground, and we don't think that the obliteration is as complete as you said. And what was the immediate reaction? Well, what do you know? Right?
Right.
In other words,
Right.
the White House
Because it's
decided.
politically inconvenient.
That's right. The White House had a firm position that the airstrikes had destroyed the Iranian nuclear program, and have your intelligence services say, "Well, that's not what the evidence shows, sir." Was frankly inconvenient, and then given them, I'll leave it this way: the mercurial personality of your president, he rejected the message completely, and that's really scary. Like I said,
Mm.
intelligence agencies are there to provide really good information that can help us figure out who's who in the zoo and what we should do about it. We're not
That
decision makers. We
right.
just
And the
we
other
Or go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was
Go
going to
ahead.
say,
I'm sorry.
what we don't do is craft our product to suit a particular individual or a particular political party. We
Hmm.
are neutral intelligence gatherers, law enforcement gatherers. We provide the best product possible. And as I wrote an op-ed piece shortly after this happened, I said, you know, if I write a report, this is not Phil Gurski's report. This report goes through umpteen levels of verification. In fact, when I used
Right.
to write things on counterterrorism, it went right back to the investigators themselves. If I was misrepresenting what they thought or what their sources were telling them, I wanted to find out. And so it went through many levels of checking before. And when it went out the building, went out the building with a CSIS crest on it, not Phil Gurski's
Hmm.
photo on it. It was the best product available from similar with the FBI. If the FBI
Right.
stamps on that, that's the FBI's position on X, Y, or Z. Um, you're not writing it to please somebody. You're writing to inform somebody.
You're right. And the other thing that you mentioned that I really want to go back on, because I think it's really important for people who are trying to understand more about how we operate, is that partnership between you as the analyst and the expertise from your role and me sitting on the operational side. And I think that that's sometimes not clearly understood about how much more effective we are when both those pieces are together. And I think when we look at some of the hollowing out that's going on in the FBI right now, how troublesome that is, because we
Yes.
also know that in the work that we lived in, that it takes a long time to get good at what you're
Yes.
doing. It takes like at least 5 years to really get your legs under you when you're talking about the intelligence world and counterterrorism. So I wonder if you could comment on that a little bit, expand upon that, because I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that. So, as you mentioned, I mean, I was a foreign intelligence analyst, then I became a counterterrorism analyst when I joined the security service. So, I was not an intelligence officer. I didn't go recruit human sources. I didn't run investigations. But one thing that one of the things I was grateful for were the people with whom I worked at CSIS. They saw my background, they saw my specialization, my
Hmm.
knowledge had been built up over more than 2 decades, and they said, "You know your stuff." And so I was one of the very few analysts that was regularly invited to source debriefs. So they would say, okay, I'm going to
Huge.
debrief my source and this place on this time. I want you there because I know you can ask questions that I can't. So I'm not sure how it works in the bureau, Lauren, but in the security
It's,
service, most of the investigators are what we call generalists,
yep.
which means you're hired, you're taught how to run a source, recruit a source, do an operation, but you might work China for 2 years and then work Russia and then work organized crime for 2 years. Like
That's true. That can shift around. I will say that in the Bureau on the counterintelligence side, people often tend to stay there and counterterrorism. But
okay.
your point is so well taken because back decades ago, I was really fortunate to be part of a team involved with debriefing a terrorist who
Mhm.
agreed to cooperate. But I couldn't have done it without the analyst. Her name was Theresa Felix. I will forever be indebted to her. But to have her in the room along with this terrorist we were debriefing and another agent and a translator was so important because she, like you, was able to sit back and say, you know what, Lauren, I heard him say this, and I think this means this. And I think tomorrow, when you go back, you need to probe a little bit further in this area so we can build upon that. And that relationship to me, anybody who doesn't see the value in it is missing the point and is not going to be as effective as he or she could be.
That's so true. I mean, I was even brought in to train human sources. So if we wanted to run somebody into what we thought a terrorism cell, I was
Hmm.
brought in to say, okay, this is how you talk. This is what you look like. This is what you say. This is what you believe. This is the ideology you want. Because again, the investigators, in some cases who were quite junior, didn't
Hmm.
have that knowledge. I was brought in to do debriefings of terrorists in prison, who claimed, oh, I've
Wow.
de-radicalized. I've changed my ways. Can you let me out of prison now? Well, no, we can't because you haven't changed your ways. I was even brought in to interview the moms
Right.
of dead terrorists, which I must say, in all of my career, you sit across the room from a mother and you see in the
Uh,
background, she's
uh,
got photos of her kid in
mhm.
elementary school and secondary school. And now her kid is dead as a terrorist and he's killed people in somewhere abroad. And now she's the mom of the dead terrorist. And you're talking to her, trying to understand, you know, what happened to your son? When
Right.
did this start? When were the changes occurring? How did they occur? What did you notice? What did you not notice? Who did he hang out with?
Mhm.
One of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And these poor women they're trying to keep it together, right? because
Yeah,
not only have
completely.
they lost their sons, but they know their sons have taken part in heinous acts of terrorism that have killed innocent people. So I was very fortunate in that sense. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a team effort. We would also bring in,
Mhm.
as in your case, we bring in the linguists. So people that we would
Right.
hire, and they would go through intercepted communications under. We would have to get a federal court warrant to
Mhm.
intercept communications, obviously in a different language, and then the linguists, they got to know the targets as well as anybody else did, and you want them there because they can detect those subtleties that other people can't, because they kind of it's almost like you're listening to your family members
Absolutely.
after a period of time.
It's absolutely true, and you can't function if you don't have that entire
Yeah.
team together and understanding a threat. So considering all that and considering a little bit of what we've talked about, what worries you the most right now about the path that the FBI is on, that the CIA is on? What does this portend for the relationship with Canada and with other allies? And what worries you about it?
A couple of things. So, strictly internally, I read more and more reports in the New York Times, the Washington Post, that the FBI has fired, dismissed, whatever, sidelined X number of people because of whatever. The most recent one is a whole bunch of people that I believe, this was a Washington Post article, I believe, that I shared with you. Um,
Mhm.
the director fired a bunch of people who were working on Iran. So the
Yep.
possibility that Iran may have agents in your country that'll retaliate because of the bombing going on right now in that country. They're all fired because they worked on the Mar-a-Lago investigation a couple of years ago, where the president was alleged to have had classified documents that he shouldn't have had in his house,
Mhm.
and that's pure vindictiveness. There's no just cause for doing that. So I worry about the bleeding of expertise, because one thing that I know that when I worked in counterterrorism, we would meet regularly. In fact, I was one of the I spearheaded a brand new group amongst the Five Eyes to look at radicalization patterns. What did we learn
Mhm.
from our investigations? What were the behavioral indicators? And we would have experts. We'd get together 2 3 days, so once in Ottawa, and once in Washington, and once in Canberra, and we'd sit around a couple of days, and we'd go through what we knew, and having
Right.
those experts in the room with you. Good God, I learned so much. Well, I had my own sort of narrow view on what the Canadian landscape was like. Now I have the
Mhm.
British landscape and the Australian landscape and the American landscape. And it made me a better analyst, because now I could see things more clearly because they'd experienced things that I hadn't seen.
Mhm.
What worries me, if those experts are all fired for reasons that don't make any sense, that kind of exchange ends. So that's very worse. And the other thing, of course, is that about a year ago or so, there were rumors, and I forget the individual's name. He's some minor figure in the Trump administration, even
Mhm.
threatened to kick Canada out of the Five Eyes. It was a completely offhanded remark that came completely out of left field. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. And of course, it was denied and hushed up later on, kind of thing. But if we're going to have this politicization of intelligence and intelligence sharing get that much worse, I mean, first of all, I don't know how you kick somebody out of the Five Eyes. I don't think there's any protocol for doing that.
Mhm.
But certainly, I mean, the United States could choose to turn the tap off. You did it against New Zealand in the 80s, and there was a controversy over a U.S. warship that was docking in Auckland, and they wouldn't. The policy was, don't ask, don't tell about nuclear weapons on board, right?
Mhm.
And the Kiwis said, "Well, you're not docking until you tell us." And the Americans said, "We're not telling you, and we're going to cut off intelligence," and they did for a period of time. If
Yeah.
we were to lose that access to American intelligence, it would have a tremendous impact on our ability to inform our decision makers. I mean, we have our own intelligence, and we still get it from the Brits and the Aussies and the New Zealanders. But the bottom line, Lauren, is Canada, given our size, is a
Mhm.
net importer of intelligence, whereas I think the United States is a net exporter of intelligence. So
Yeah.
losing that access would have a deleterious effect on our understanding of the situation around the world. And at that point, it could start to affect joint operations as well. And we've bragged now for over a century, well, two
Mhm.
centuries now, that we have the world's longest undefended border. People, until
Right.
recently, right? People cross pretty easily. I'm not going to cross anytime soon for reasons I won't get into. I remember as a kid with my dad going to see the Tigers play in Detroit, and you basically, it was a wave and a smile at the border. That's all you had. No passports, no
Yeah.
ID, nothing. Um, so we do share information that keeps the border safe for both of our countries. And
Mhm.
if this is going to be jeopardized because of the politicization and because of the vindictiveness of certain officials, it's going to affect both of us. It'll affect us because we won't have the intelligence that you share with us. It's going to
Right.
affect the Americans because we'll be that much more. I mean, I wouldn't say be a tit for tat. Let's just say, if we're cut off, there'll be a greater reluctance to share what we know with our American counterparts because, well, you're not sharing with us. So why in heaven's name? It'd be like tariffs, right? You put tariffs on us, we're going to put tariffs on you.
Right. Well, and the thing is everybody suffers with that. Everybody
Yes.
is less safe
Yeah.
when that happens, and I think that's the key point because we both know that political leaders come and go,
Yeah.
and hopefully they come in with the best of intentions about what they want to do. But at the end of the day, the jobs that you and I had and the people that still do those jobs on a day to day basis do it out of patriotism, do it because
Yeah.
they love their country,
Yeah.
they want to make their country safe. And we both know that the people doing the job on the ground are not paying attention to the politics. They're about getting the mission done.
Right.
And so, as we've often said, and I think I shared with you when I was in France, the French didn't agree with the choice to invade Iraq either. And I
Mhm.
was so worried that they would stop sharing information. And it was the best feedback because what they said to me is, don't worry, that's the politicians. We still have a job to do in keeping the people in our countries and around the world safer. And so we're going to continue to focus on that. And I think if we can do that, that's what keeps everybody in a better place. And I think hopefully hearing from you too is really important because it allows people to understand the mechanism and the importance of those relationships.
And it's also unnecessary. I mean, the system was working fine. Again,
Hmm.
I've seen incredibly sensitive source intelligence that's being shared back and forth for over 3 decades. Um, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
Again, we're going to have our disagreements, but it's such a fluid relationship that we have. It's almost seamless.
Yeah.
We have our liaison people in each other's agencies, but we also have people that, you know, work in each other's agencies
Hmm.
and even work on files that normally they wouldn't have access to because there's that trust factor that's there.
Well, and
And for this to be happening,
even with you and I, Phil,
yeah,
because we came from the environment we came in, although we didn't know each other personally while we were still working for our respective governments, we knew people in common. So that trust always is there. We inherently said, I'm trusting
yeah,
him, I'm trusting her,
yeah,
because we spent so long
right.
recognizing that we were better together and we assume that trust is there for the good until there's a reason not to. And I think that's an important point also and a through line that will continue for us probably for the rest of our lives.
I couldn't agree with you more. I still have very close friendships with colleagues in Australia, United Kingdom, in New Zealand, and the United States, even in some of the Western European partners with which I worked in counterterrorism over the years.
Mhm.
They weren't just colleagues; they became friends, and those friendships are lasting, and it's because it worked well. And trust is earned, and this trust
Mhm.
has been earned over the better part of almost, well, it's not quite a century now since the end of the Second World War, but for two countries, well, I'll throw the Brits in, for three countries that died together on the beaches of Normandy to
Mhm.
free Europe from tyranny. Similar in Afghanistan,
Yeah.
when the president, talked about nobody else, was on the front lines of Afghanistan. I mean, people were justifiably angry. I mean, 164 Canadian soldiers died in Afghanistan. That's not a small number for a country our size.
No, it's
And
not.
to have that ignored and have that sort of poo-pooed or dismissed is it really hurts because Americans, Canadians, Brits, Australians, we all fought together in those various wars, and to insult the memory and the sacrifice that was made, but Lauren, it's so unnecessary. I mean, there's other ways to score cheap political points. And you know as well as I do, that's what politicians do. They want
Yeah.
to score cheap points, right? But why in heaven's name would you score cheap points when it comes to multilateral intelligence and military and law enforcement alliances? It doesn't make any sense to me.
No.
It's almost like an own goal. Like you're just cutting off your nose to spite your face in this regard. Uh,
Yep.
I hope this too shall pass. I don't know.
Hmm.
Um, the alliance is far too important to founder. I hope we can get to the point where um, the trust levels are going to be reestablished. Like I said, at the ground, the coal face level, I'm not too worried about that. It's the
Right.
higher levels that I think are going to take. And as my prime minister said, you know, trust, if you break trust one day, it doesn't reappear the next day. It's going to take some
That's
time to rebuild that. I have confidence, though, in our alliance. I have confidence that, as I said, as neighbors, as friends,
mhm.
we've been very close for, since the last time you tried to invade us in 1812.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue so this we want to start wrapping this up. But if you could build on that just a little, what, Phil, would you like to leave our listeners with? What is one thing or a couple things that you would really want people to understand about the importance of the liaison relationship and the alliances between the United States and Canada and with others?
Okay, I'll put it real simple. United States has no better or closer friend and ally than Canada. That's been the case for centuries. We have our disagreements. There always is a latent anti-Americanism within Canada. It's only because I think a lot of us, we see you as a major power that we're not. We're very much a middle power, but
Mm.
we visited each other's countries. We do vacations in each other's countries. Canada, Canadians flee to Florida and Arizona when it's minus 145 million degrees up here in wintertime, like it has this winter. Although that too has been affected over the past couple months, unfortunately. But why would you want to harm such a close, mutually beneficial relationship? Whether we're talking trade, whether we're talking the military. Let me look at
Mhm.
NORAD, right? North American Air Defense.
Yeah,
I mean, this has been around since the Cold War, and it's jointly commanded by Canadian and American. Like, why would you? Again, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So,
right.
this alliance has stood the test of time. We have shown through blood and treasure that we're on the same side. Um, and I'm moving on. I hope we can get back to that sense of trust and mutual respect. I'm hopeful. Again, with the average American, the average Canadian, we get it, and I think
Yep.
it'll be a rather rapid reestablishment of that relationship once the
Mhm.
current political shenanigans end. Um, so I'm confident in that regard. I just wish we weren't going through this rather hard patch right now.
Yeah, they are tough. They are tough. Phil, I am so grateful to you for taking the time to come on here with me and talk about this. I mean, we have our own great new friendship forged over the last
We have.
14 months or so, which is wonderful. But we value hearing from you as our as our partners, as our friends to the north. You've always been there. I hope it always stays. And I'm very grateful for you sharing your time, your wisdom, your views on things because it matters. And so thank you so much for that.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Even though you won both gold medals in ice hockey at the Olympics, we will forgive you.
Well, thank you for that. And thanks for everyone for tuning in for this episode of the Steady State Sentinel. This is Lauren Anderson, still standing watch. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Steady State Sentinel podcast. Don't miss out on more insights and exposés from America's premier global security experts.
Also, subscribe to our Substack at substack.com/@steadystate1 and follow our social media. And join us right here next week for another exciting edition.
The Steady State is a nonprofit organization working to sustain our democracy and national security.
Join us and support our mission by visiting www.thesteadystate.org.